There comes a stage in life when the bond between parents and children begins to change in ways you never expected. For years you poured your heart into raising them. You guided, protected, sacrificed, and gave without keeping count. But as time moves on, one day you notice something has shifted. Perhaps they interrupt you mid-sentence. Maybe they dismiss your advice with a casual shrug. Sometimes their tone stings, it feels less like love and more like obligation. And in those moments you begin to wonder, when did I stop being someone they respected and start being someone they simply tolerated? This realization can be painful. It feels like a quiet betrayal, especially after everything you've invested in their lives. But here's the truth, getting angry, reminding them of your sacrifices, or demanding respect will rarely fix the problem. In fact, it often deepens the distance. Respect is not something you can force. It is something you inspire. So, what should you do when your children no longer treat you with the dignity you deserve? In this first part, I'm going to share the foundation shift that will begin to transform the way they see you. And it starts not with them but with you. Step 1. Stop seeking their approval. One of the biggest traps parents fall into, especially as they grow older, is the subtle habit of seeking approval from their own children. You may not even realize you're doing it. It happens when you go out of your way to adjust your plans for them, even when it inconveniences you. It happens when you silence your opinions because you're afraid they might disagree. It happens when you put their comfort above your own needs, hoping they will notice, appreciate, and respect you in return. But here's the painful reality. The more you chase their approval, the less they give it. Respect doesn't grow when you bend yourself out of shape. Respect grows when you stand tall, even if others don't agree. I once met a woman named Clara. In her younger years, she was sharp, opinionated, and independent. But after retirement, she began shaping her life around her adult children. She cooked what they preferred, adjusted her daily routine around their visits, and never spoke up when they dismissed her ideas. "I just don't want to upset them," she once told me. And yet, the more she gave up her voice, the less her children valued it. They started treating her kindness as expectation. They no longer asked for her thoughts, because they assumed she'd simply go along with whatever they wanted. Clara believed she was keeping peace in the family. But in reality she was teaching them, without words, that her needs came second. Over time they stopped seeing her as a strong presence and started seeing her as someone easy to overlook. Respect is never earned through silence. It is earned through self-respect. The first step, then, is to remind yourself that your worth does not depend on their approval. Say no when you need to. Speak your mind even if it isn't welcomed. Set boundaries not as an act of rebellion, but as an act of self-honor. Because when you respect yourself, you communicate silently, yet powerfully. I am not invisible. I matter. Step 2. Hold your ground with calm strength. Another mistake parents make is trying to fight their way back into respect. When children talk down to you, the natural instinct is to argue, to remind them of everything you've done for them, to demand they treat you better. But here's something important to understand. Respect is not won through shouting matches. It's not earned by proving your point louder. In fact, the more you argue, the more you communicate desperation to be heard, to be validated. And desperation is the opposite of respect. Instead, true influence comes from calm strength. Think of a mountain. It doesn't need to argue with the storm. It simply stands unshaken until the storm passes. That's how you must carry yourself when disrespect arises, not by lowering yourself to their level, but by showing them what dignity looks like. I once knew a man named Samuel, a retired military officer. He had spent his career commanding respect with quiet authority. But at home, his grown children sometimes treated him as though his opinions no longer mattered. At first he fought back, trying to remind them that he had lived longer and knew more. But the arguments only created distance. One day he made a different choice. When they dismissed his views, he no longer snapped back. He spoke once, calmly, with clarity. If they ignored it, he simply let it go without anger. He began carrying himself not like someone fighting for approval, but like someone who already owned his dignity. And something shifted. Over time, his children began pausing when he spoke. They noticed his calm presence. They began to treat him not as a man who needed their validation, but as someone whose wisdom commanded attention. Respect, you see, is not demanded, it is modeled. Step 3. Detach emotionally without withdrawing love. The hardest truth for many parents is this. You cannot rely on your children for your sense of self-worth. You may love them with every fiber of your being, but if your emotional stability depends on how they treat you, you give them unspoken power over your happiness. Children, no matter how old, can sense this. And when they feel you are emotionally dependent on them, it often creates tension instead of closeness. They begin to see you less as a source of wisdom, and more as a weight they are expected to carry. True respect comes when you can love without clinging, care without depending, give without losing yourself. I once met Helen, a mother in her late 60s. She spent most of her time waiting by the phone, hoping her children would call. When they didn't, she called them repeatedly, reminding them how much she missed them. Instead of drawing them closer, her need for constant connection pushed them further away. One day, she stopped waiting. She picked up painting, joined a walking group, and even traveled with friends. Suddenly, her life was no longer empty. It was full, independent, and vibrant. And something surprising happened. Her children began calling more often. They began respecting her time because they could see she had her own. Respect grows when your children see that your happiness doesn't depend on them. When you have your own passions, your own purpose, and your own joy, they begin to look at you differently, not as someone waiting for scraps of attention, but as someone living fully with or without them. Part 2. Setting boundaries and reclaiming your power. Before we continue, if you haven't already, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps us create more content that uplifts, guides, and inspires. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. In Part 1, we explored the foundation of regaining respect, building self-respect, letting go of approval-seeking, and carrying yourself with quiet strength. But that's just the beginning. In this second part, we'll dive into 3 powerful actions that will help you set healthy boundaries, shift the dynamic with your children, and remind them that your presence is not to be overlooked but honored. Action 1. Boundaries are not barriers, they are bridges. Many parents confuse boundaries with walls. They worry that setting limits will push their children away or create conflict. But in truth, boundaries are not barriers, they are bridges. They teach others how to treat you. They protect your dignity without sacrificing love. And they are often the missing piece when respect begins to fade. Think about it. When you allow your children to interrupt you constantly, dismiss your feelings, or take advantage of your generosity without saying a word, you unintentionally teach them that this behavior is acceptable. Not because they are bad people, but because people, especially family, will always test the limits of what you allow. I once knew a father named Robert. He was a kind man, always patient, always willing to adjust. But over the years, his children began to see him as someone they could dismiss. They interrupted him at dinner, ignored his advice, and even criticized the way he lived his life. At first, Robert let it slide, telling himself it wasn't worth creating tension. But deep down it hurt. One day he decided to make a change. When his son interrupted, Robert calmly said, "I'll continue when you're ready to listen." When his daughter rolled her eyes at his opinion, he replied, "You don't have to agree with me, but I expect respect when I speak." At first they resisted. They argued, they pushed back. But Robert held firm, not with anger but with calm consistency. Over time something changed. His children began listening. They realized their father was no longer tolerating disrespect. He had drawn a line, and because he enforced it gently but firmly, they adjusted. Boundaries are not about creating distance, they're about teaching respect. And the moment you set them, you'll notice your children start to view you differently. Action 2. Stop giving without appreciation. As parents, we are natural givers. We give time, energy, support, money, advice, sometimes even when it drains us. And often we give without expecting anything in return. But here's the problem. When generosity is constant and unacknowledged, it stops being seen as a gift and starts being seen as an entitlement. The more you give without appreciation, the less they value what you offer. I knew a man named George, a father of 3. He was always the first to help, whether it was financial assistance, babysitting his grandchildren, or dropping everything to accommodate his children's requests. But over time something troubling happened. Instead of being grateful, his children started expecting his help as though it were their right, and the moment George couldn't give, they grew frustrated, even resentful. His generosity was no longer seen as kindness, it was simply assumed. One day George decided enough was enough. He began saying no when it didn't feel right. He stopped offering help before it was even asked. And most importantly, he reminded himself that his time, energy, and resources were valuable. At first, his children were shocked. They didn't understand why their father was suddenly setting limits. But eventually, something shifted. They started thanking him when he did help. They began to see his generosity as something special, not automatic. Respect grew not because he demanded it but because he showed them that his kindness had value. Lesson here is simple: stop giving to those who don't appreciate it. When you teach people that your generosity requires respect, they will begin treating it that way. Action 3. Rebuild your identity beyond parenthood. One of the most powerful shifts you can make, both for yourself and for the way your children see you, is to rebuild your identity outside of them. For decades, your role as a parent may have been the center of your life. Every decision, every sacrifice, every moment was tied to their needs. But now, as they've grown, you face a choice: either cling to that identity and risk being overlooked, or embrace a new one that commands respect. Children, no matter how much they love you, will not respect someone whose life revolves only around them. But they will admire someone who continues to live fully, to grow, and to thrive. Take Eleanor, for example. A widow in her 70s, she had poured her entire life into her children after her husband passed away. She called daily, offered advice they didn't ask for, and constantly sought ways to stay involved in their lives. Instead of drawing them closer, it pushed them away. Her children visited less, her calls grew shorter, and Eleanor felt emptier than ever. Then she made a change. She joined a local book club. She began gardening again. She even traveled with a group of friends to places she had always dreamed of visiting. Suddenly, her life had meaning beyond waiting for her children's attention. And what happened? Her children started calling more. They asked about her adventures. They admired her independence. Most importantly, they began to respect her again, not out of obligation but out of genuine admiration. When your children see that you have a life of your own, filled with purpose and passion, they will begin to see you not as someone dependent on them, but as someone to look up to. Closing thoughts for part 2. If your children don't respect you, it's not the end of the story. You have more power than you realize. By setting clear boundaries, refusing to give without appreciation, and rebuilding your identity outside of parenthood, you can completely transform the way they treat you, because respect is not about demanding obedience, it's about living in a way that naturally commands it. Part 3. Rising above resentment and inspiring respect. Before we begin, I want to gently remind you, if you're finding value in this video, please like, share, and subscribe. It not only helps us reach more people but also reminds us that these conversations truly matter. Thank you for being here. In parts 1 and 2, we talked about building self-respect, setting boundaries, and reclaiming your identity. But there's one more step, a step that transforms everything. It's the shift from resentment to renewal. Because even if your children have hurt you, ignored you, or disrespected you, carrying bitterness will only deepen the divide. True respect is not forced, it's inspired. And in this final part, we'll explore 3 ways to rise above, lead with grace, and rebuild the bond with your children in a way that lasts for generations. Action 1. Release the burden of resentment. When children fail to respect us, it cuts deep. Feels like betrayal. After everything you've done, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the endless support, it feels unfair to be dismissed, ignored, or treated coldly. But here's the truth. Holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and hoping the other person feels the pain. It doesn't punish them, it punishes you. I remember a woman named Clara, who carried years of anger toward her adult son. He rarely called, and when he did, his words were sharp and dismissive. Clara replayed those moments in her mind every night. Her bitterness grew, and so did her loneliness. One day, during a quiet walk, Clara realized something. Her resentment wasn't changing her son. It was only stealing her peace. That evening, she wrote in her journal, "I choose to let go. I cannot control his behavior, but I can control my heart." The next time her son called, she listened with calmness. She didn't expect warmth, but she gave kindness without surrendering her dignity. Slowly her energy shifted. And with time her son softened too. The lesson? Letting go of resentment doesn't mean you excuse their behavior. It means you refuse to let their behavior control your peace. And that shift alone makes you stronger, and surprisingly, more respected. Action 2. Lead by example, not demands. Respect cannot be demanded like an order. It must be inspired. And the most powerful way to inspire it is through example. Think of the people you respect most. It's rarely because they told you to respect them. It's because of how they lived, their patience, their integrity, their quiet strength. I knew an elderly man named Samuel. His children didn't always treat him well. They argued with him, sometimes ignored him, and even mocked his old-fashioned ways. But Samuel never fought for their approval. Instead, he focused on living with dignity. He woke early, kept his home in order, and spent time volunteering in his community. He smiled at neighbors, shared wisdom with younger people, and carried himself with calm confidence. Over time, something amazing happened. His children began to notice how others admired their father. People in the neighborhood spoke highly of him. His name carried weight, not because he demanded it but because he lived in a way that naturally commanded it. Eventually his children softened. They realized that the man they had taken for granted was respected everywhere he went. And slowly their tone toward him changed too. The point is clear. If you want your children's respect, don't chase it. Live in such a way that others give it to you freely. Your children will see it, and whether they admit it or not, they will feel it. Action 3. Rebuild the bond with presence, not pressure. Many parents, when they feel disrespected, try to pull their children closer by pushing harder, calling more often, giving more advice, or reminding them of past sacrifices. But this usually backfires. Pressure creates distance. What rebuilds a bond is not pressure, but presence. Presence means showing up without demands. It means listening more than lecturing. It means finding small moments of connection rather than forcing big ones. For example, instead of reminding your daughter of everything you've done for her, you might simply ask, "How are you really doing?" And then listen without judgment. Instead of pushing your son to visit more often, you might say, "It was good hearing your voice today. Call me when you can," and then give him the space to come back on his own. Children may resist pressure, but they are drawn to presence. They remember the parent who listened, who showed patience, who made them feel safe. And when they feel that presence, respect begins to grow, not out of obligation but out of love. Final thoughts. My dear friend, if your children don't respect you right now, it is painful, but it is not permanent. Respect can be rebuilt. Not by shouting, not by demanding, but by rising above, setting boundaries, letting go of resentment, and living with quiet dignity. Remember this. You are worthy of respect simply because you exist, because you have lived, because you have given more than most people will ever know. The path forward is not about begging for recognition. It's about standing tall, reclaiming your power, and inspiring respect by the way you live. And when you do, your children will notice. Maybe not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But one day they will see you not just as a parent, but as a person worthy of honor. If this message touched your heart, write in the comments "Respect begins with me." And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs this reminder. Thank you for walking with me through this journey. May you find peace, strength, and the respect you truly deserve.